Is the Vice Chairman for the Cyber Future Foundation. Along with Val and Harold, thank you all for being here. I am truly honored to moderate this next panel. It's a panel of thought leadership, of executives in our government space, and also one of our panelists, Tom, has great experience not only in the government space, but in the private sector as well. So allow me to get right into the program and introduce our panelists. We will be addressing cybercrime, securing cyberspace beyond borders and boundaries through the US government and DHS Lens. And with that, allow me to introduce PJ Lechleitner, the current acting Deputy Director for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. PJ's, wherever you want, PJ. PJ's job while he's not acting as the number 2 person in ICE is the Executive Associate Director for Homeland Security Investigations, and which is the head of the agency for Homeland Security Investigations. Also joining us, I am honored to introduce Dave Smith from the United States Secret Service. Dave is the Deputy Associate Director for the Criminal Investigation Division. He oversees Investigative Support Division, amongst other things. He has basically under his supervision and authority all specialized cyber-centric assets under his purview. Dave, thank you for being here and honored to have you. And last but certainly not least, and this person really needs no introduction. Everybody knows and is fond of Tom Patterson. Tom, thank you very much for being here. Tom is certainly a thought leader and is the director of the Cyber Moonshot program and formerly with Unisys as a vice president and chief trust officer. Still, oh, I'm sorry, still. Forgive me. I didn't just fire you, Tom, honestly. But we are honored to have all 3 of these guys. Please sit down and right here. Tom is fine. We have microphones right by your side. And allow me to kick this off. So let me start by turning the mic over to, we'll start with PJ and work our way down. Guys, if you could give just a brief introduction of your role. I stated obviously your titles and whatnot, but I can't do your service to our great country justice the way you can. So PJ, please take a few minutes and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. PJ Lechleitner. I'm, as Dave mentioned, I'm the acting deputy director for Immigration Customs Enforcement, or ICE. But my full-time job, until we get confirmed director, is the executive associate director for Homeland Security Investigations. So that's all the special agents, the 1811 criminal investigators for HSI and ICE. The second largest cadre as such in the federal government, so big. And pretty broad. Transnational crime is a specialty. That's where we focus, and we stick to that. I'm career law enforcement. That's what I've done my entire professional career. I started, though, in the cyber world when I left high school and went to the Navy, and baptism by fire, signals intelligence, early on, and I was doing it in the late 80s, early 90s, and then moved into street cop time, and then went federal, and then came back to the cyber world, and I ran our cyber division for a while, and then I was over our international division for a while, and then various capacities, and now I'm over the whole shebang, I guess. So I started with cyber, and I have a lifelong interest in it, and I look at it through a holistic lens. So it's not just a criminal piece, because that's one piece. It's not just the security piece, that's another piece. But it's really, it's a whole thing. It's cybercrime is crime, crime is cybercrime. So that's where I come from. Thank you.
Thank you, PJ. Deputy Assistant Director Dave Smith, would you please give us a brief introduction?
Good morning, everyone. Again, Dave Smith, U.S. Secret Service, Deputy Assistant Director within the Office of Investigations. That's a headquarters assignment up in Washington, D.C. So I've told a few folks, I actually grew up about 20 minutes from here in a small town called Waynesboro, Georgia. So it's good to be home. The position I fill now is what I consider a very influential position through the investigative lens. I know most of you are asking, what's the Secret Service doing here and how far out is the president? We obviously do have a dual mission. Our original mission is investigations. Counterfeit currency is what a lot of people know us for. And what we do is, what we've done is protected the financial critical infrastructure for the United States. That was in the form of fiat currency since our inception in 1865. It just transitioned from paper to plastic to digital, which is why we're here today. So as Mr. Marwell was saying, our mission now is still protecting the financial critical infrastructure. That's following the money. And obviously that leads you into the realm of cybercrime because criminals are still in the business of enriching themselves. That's not changing, won't change anytime soon. Lots of all within my purview, within the U.S. Secret Service. And
Dave and Tom, if you would, give us a brief introduction, sir.
I'm honored to be sitting next to these two cops. My name's Tom Patterson. I've spent pretty much my whole career involved in national security, but I've been lucky enough to do it from a lot of different facets and aspects. I started as a contractor in the IC as a young man in my 20s and lived in the Middle East for a long time and came back to the US. And the one thing I did that was kind of smart was I was able to maintain my security clearance. And so that allowed me, as the world kind of evolved and the threats kind of evolved, it allowed me to continue to find ways to serve, whether it's on the public side or the private side. These last 5 years, I've been my eyes have opened up, and I've been assigned to a project at the White House called the National Cyber Moonshot. And that all started with a question from President Obama to his advisory board called NSTAC. And the question was simply, can we make the internet safe and secure for critical infrastructure in 10 years? And after the laughter kind of died down, because of course you can't, we got to work on thinking through. We spent about 1.5 years working with the best and the brightest minds in these fields. And the answer that we presented back to then President Trump was, hey, if it's a whole of nation effort, we think we can. We can stop chasing our tail. We can start to get proactive. And so a report was written, delivered, and signed off by President Trump. And pleased to say it was actioned well over the last couple of years of his presidency. And it was picked up as part of the first 100 days effort of President Biden. So it's a young project that's already served 3 presidents, which goes to show that NatSec is nonpartisan. And that's one of the beautiful things about the role that we all have, is that we are strictly nonpartisan. We just want to defend this great country. And this continues. The effort continues even stronger than before. There's a lot of money appropriated from Congress. There's a lot of organization coming from the White House and both the agencies that you two guys represent, as well as DOD and DOE, and the companies themselves that are stepping up. So I hope to talk a little bit more about that later in this discussion about some of the work that's underway. But I will tell you, with my clearances and knowing the threats as well as anybody, I'm very optimistic about the future of cyber defense in America.
That's great to hear, Tom. Thank you very much. And we will come back to you and ask you a few questions about your past as well as what you see in store for the future. But first, allow me, since we're on since we just heard from Mr. Wells, with CISA. Let me turn to PJ for the first question. PJ, what is HSI and CISA doing on working on vulnerabilities in cyber currently? And what is the main focus? What do you see in the future?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, we have an operation that's known as Operation Centurion, Cyber Centurion. So this is in conjunction with CISA. We're basically the police officers and they're the firefighters, if you can imagine that. And we work in conjunction, obviously, Secret Services piece of this, FBI, there's others. There's lots in this space. This specific one is addressing critical infrastructure. So we're going out proactively, looking at common vulnerabilities and exposures and working with private industry and specifically in the infrastructure space and seeing where the vulnerabilities lie. We're trying to detect these. We're trying to, and respond to these and then, and educate and then hopefully stop any kind of attacks before they actually happen. So it's a fairly new program over the last few years. As we know, cyber is constantly evolving. We see this as it's just growing and growing and growing. And it's a global operation led by our cyber center up in the National Capital Region. But that's one example of how we're partnering with CISA and going after some vulnerabilities. We could all do this full time and we wouldn't find them all. I mean, there's just no way that we could do that. So it's a partnership and a whole of government approach. We're just one of the cogs that are helping on that.
Thank you, Deputy Director Lechleitner. Deputy Assistant Director Smith, similar question in reference to what this panel is all about, securing cyberspace beyond boundaries through the DHS Lens. How do you define the boundaries and how do the foreign partnerships come into play with your respective investigations at the United States Secret Service?
Thanks, Dave. So I tell people often that, as a Secret Service agent, they ask, so why do you guys have offices in Dallas and in San Francisco and in Chicago? I was like, well, you can't walk up to a police chief, a week before the president shows up and say, hey, Chief so-and-so, we need 600 officers or 60 officers for this site, 20 bikes, your helicopters. Like, life just doesn't work that way, right? So along the same lines, when it comes to establishing those relationships, that has to happen before the ask comes, right? So for us, back in the day when I was a phase one young agent in the Bay Area of San Francisco, the boundaries were San Francisco County, San Mateo County, and calling up to Sacramento, making sure your case didn't bleed over to the next district. Those are no longer the days we're in. Your boundaries are limitless. So we have to have relationships with foreign law enforcement partners today, because when we have joint warrants like we did yesterday in South Africa, or we need to take down, we need to participate in a warrant in Estonia because we're looking at a digital currency wallet address, those relationships have to be established in advance, because when you want in, you have to already have some name recognition. And that's how we connect the dots, because when we execute that search warrant or partner on that search warrant and can connect that person with a digital currency wallet address that was recently used in a ransomware ask, that's when you have the person with the smoking gun and you can compel them to work with you so you can get additional information moving forward. So.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Mr. Patterson, in reference to all of your experiences, both in the government space and private space, and in furtherance of your role as the director of the White House Moonshot program, you have seen things from the cyber perspective in the past. What do you see going forward in the future?
Yeah, this is the future is where I spend most of my time now. And hence I'm part of the Cyber Future Foundation. But there are a lot of good people working on today's threats. Dave, you just mentioned ransomware. I would imagine that's the first question that you get from any CEO as you go out and talk to people. Should I pay or not? And if I pay, how should I pay? This is certainly the question I get most often now about today's threats. But I view ransomware as a symptom, not as the problem. Before, there were a series of things that were the most important thing that everybody cared about that year, that couple of years. And ransomware is a problem now because it's just so easy to launch it, and it's most companies, even if they've checked all the boxes that says that they're compliant with all the standards, they're not really secure, and they're certainly not resilient. And until companies change their mindset and focus on, hey, we need to be resilient, we need to be able to take a punch and still keep churning out our widgets, until that's the goal of the boards of directors of companies, they're going to continue to be hit by this and victimized by this easy to deploy, very sophisticated ransomware. But that will change. Companies will get better at doing that. If for no other reason is it's been expensive for them for the first time. They're actually writing big checks or taking big hits. In the past, maybe their stock price fell for a couple of weeks, but it almost always came back up. And they know that, where they said, we'll just buy insurance. So I'm not so focused on today's threat because I know that there's so many good people and so much money out there, good technology. The solutions are there, just a matter of boards deciding to implement them or not. There's no magic that has to happen. I'm focused very much on our collective future. And that's really something that has two big factors. One, today, certainly yesterday, probably still today, you can turn off your computer and still survive. If everything goes to haywire in your computer, you shut it off and you go to the beach and you spend a lovely day at the beach and enjoy your life, and it'll be fixed tomorrow. Or Netflix will be down for a day. It's the call I get from my mom all the time. It's like, oh, that's what you do. Okay, I get it now. Tomorrow, though, the rest of this decade, there's not going to be an off switch. Literally billions of IoT devices are going to be all around us, all throughout our lives. They don't have an off switch. We don't control them. We never gave them permission to interact with us, yet they're going to know everything about us. And they're all going to be connected by this brand new way of communicating called 5G, which, despite the ads you see on television, is not just about faster Netflix. It's an entirely new way of communicating. It will be the new communications infrastructure for the entire nation. So we have this opportunity to use that for good, or we can default to letting it be done for profit only, in which case we could end up this decade in a worse position. So between the 5G connectivity, the IoT, the change in decisioning from computer programs that we write to artificial intelligence that writes itself, and that becoming the primary decisioning factor that's out there, the future that we have over the rest of this decade is one where there is no off switch, where we no longer control it. It does what we've told it to do, but it's off and running. So if something goes wrong, if there's a bad actor that gets in and turns it against us, or if there's just sunspots that make it go crazy, both things are realistic. If something goes wrong in that future world, there's no off switch. We can't just go to the beach. All the power goes out in the city. The roads get clogged. The cars stop working. All these are realistic scenarios. So I'm very focused on using these same technologies for good. And that's where I think the exciting part, that's why I'm so optimistic, Dave, is that there's great people and great money and great foresight and leadership from the government and the private sector working on how we harness AI for good. So it's not just the bad guys using it against us, but let's be good guys and use it to defend us. Same with 5G, same with quantum communications, same with better advanced identities, new ways to communicate, redundancy and resilience in our networks. All these things are really possible. They're all coming. And I think that's the most exciting area of cybersecurity. It's not the only one, but it's the one for me.
Thank you, Tom. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Deputy Director Lechleitner. A lot of people in this room and online virtually have heard a lot about the innovation lab that Homeland Security Investigations has brought forward. What exactly are you trying to do with it, and what does it entail? And is there a public-private partnership that can participate towards that end?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so law enforcement is not traditionally known as the most progressive or proactive thing that's ever in society. Let's be real, because we're always dealing with threats and we're reacting to those threats ever since Lord Peel. I mean, we evolve with that. That we're always a step behind. Moore's law and how everything is evolving and has been evolving, it's just getting more and more difficult to keep up. We have our cyber center that tries that, but we really needed to kind of think outside the box. So we established several years ago an innovation lab. That innovation lab is, if you can think of Silicon Valley, private sector here, you know what I'm talking about, like outside of the box, get together, what's a solution to a problem? It's artificial intelligence, it's big data, it's machine learning. Let's get the big brains in a room. They're not all cops, some of them are just partners, some industry, academia, and we titled it the Innovation Lab. We set it up within Homeland Security Investigations. We have other partners within the department coming in, and we can, try and address a given problem or come up with a solution set for something and attack that in a way we've never tried to do before. So it's just trying to kind of attack and evolve and look into the future as it was discussed here in ways that traditional law enforcement just hasn't done before. And we got to try. We know other innovation labs exist. You can think DARPA, and you can think the Department of Energy has a number of those labs, but they're not specific to law enforcement. That's what we never had. So we needed to set up one for law enforcement, and that's what the Innovation Lab is. And the only way it works is by partnering with the private sector, because we don't have the tools for that. We have some very smart people that, quite frankly, are kind of very odd for our occupation, because it's not normal to have those type of skills in our line of work. We have a few, and then we combine those with the private sector, and we're trying to kind of solve these problems that really don't have easy solutions, and trying to move collectively forward so we can address the vulnerabilities.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Assistant Director Smith, a similar question in reference to innovation. What solutions from a Secret Service perspective are being deployed for cybercrime, not only throughout Secret Service, but throughout DHS?
So you think about, like, you watch movies, popular culture here. You have that police movie scene where you have the tech guy at the desk, and you have like the Neanderthal cops, if you will, with the leather gear on. What I'm seeing, and what I'm sure we're seeing across the law enforcement community, is you have less of the guys with the leather on, standing the hot shots, and you have more of the guys at the desk. And that's what you need. Like I said before, undercover activity doesn't look like what it looked like in, the early 2000s and the late 1990s when I was a young agent. They look like, when people are dating online now, you're just in front of a monitor, acting like you're Fabio, but you actually look like me. So one of the things we're doing is partnering with places like the Georgia Cyber Center, quite frankly, and making sure we are going out seeking the right talent to be a part of the investigative team. Again, less of a reliance on the traditional case agent unilaterally, and more of a reliance on the investigative team, if you will. That investigative team includes analysts, more technically savvy personnel. We have a ton of computer scientists that support our investigative mission that didn't exist several years ago, because say for instance our home platform where we work off of can't be the same platform that we use to engage bad guys. So we have a ton of professionals, technicians that did not exist in years past that exist now, that allow us to play in a world that we did not have to play in years ago. So does that answer the questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's great. Very. Thank you very much. Mr. Patterson, in all your time in the government space and being on different boards, advisory boards and boards of directors addressing cyber matters, what can you tell us would be the corporate world's needs or desires from the government. How can that C-suite perspective look, and what would they need to deal with as far as working with the U.S. government, in particular, our law enforcement
yeah.
counterparts?
So I was able to be part of a program with the FBI probably 15 or so years ago, which we called the Domain Program. And the whole goal of Domain was to introduce the local CEOs and their AOR with the local agents. And do it, well, I guess you guys all use the term left of boom. You do it before the crisis. So after you get hit and there's some, a bad thing has just happened to your company, the CEO's in a panic. That's not the first time you want to meet law enforcement. Just like you were saying, Dave, you want to go out there in advance and organize so that when you call for a helicopter, he's going to know who you are and he's going to give it to you. The same is true with these CEOs. And so we ran programs across the country with these agents, calling up the local CEOs and say, hey, I'm from the FBI, let's go have coffee at Starbucks. And it was not nearly so easy as it should have been. The agents were uncomfortable. The CEOs were uncomfortable. They wanted the agents not to wear their sidearm, and the agents kind of explained why that's not going to happen. and the agents themselves were like, well, what do I talk about to a CEO? They have these 401ks, and I don't know what that is. And there's a lot of language and learning. But that program has evolved to something called FBI DSAC. And I should know what DSAC stands for, but it's DSAC. You can Google it. And someone put it in chat, and then I'll know. But it's a great program. It was born from the Domain Program, and now it's nationwide, and it's hundreds of chief security officers of the more important critical companies across the country, all working very closely with the FBI. Everyone knows each other. We're friendly. We go drinking together, whether it's coffee or something else. We get together regularly post-COVID and pre-COVID. But when something happens, we know who to talk to. They know who we are. And that program, I think, is a real example of what we're trying to evolve to across agencies, across working with the government. And it really comes down to that statement of left of boom. Get to know your government counterparts before you're there. If you're a CEO, before you're there asking for something. A lot of CEOs come to Washington and say, I want a grant, or I want a law changed, or I want forgiveness from this tax thing. But before you do that, go and meet your counterparts in federal law enforcement. The amount of capabilities that these guys bring to the table is phenomenal. They will put most cyber company talent to shame when you get down to the right folks that they're working on the right problem. They have access to information you don't have. They have very high levels of skill, and getting to know who they are beforehand is just the biggest door opener. So that's my word of wisdom here. If you're a CEO or a CSO at a company in any city in America, knock on the door electronically first so you don't get in trouble, but knock on the door of your local FBI field office and introduce yourself, or your local Secret Service field office and introduce yourself. It's not like the old days. They will, they're busy, but they are happy to know you. I would imagine you guys, your agents, they get graded on, relationships that they maintain. And so you're actually helping them. I know that was something we put into Domain, was trying to get that to be part of their checklist at the end of the year. So getting out there before there's a problem, before you're asking for something, is a great thing. And then do it on a regular basis. It's eye-opening.
Thank you, sir. Well said. So question both for Deputy Director Lechleitner and Deputy Assistant Director Smith. From a respective HSI and Secret Service and DHS Lens, what resources are available for folks that want to engage in that public-private partnership? And what is available for consumer businesses, as well as what's available in the corporate sectors?
So I'll start out, but let me add this on the front end of that. So keep in mind, the Secret Service is very much, we practice a lot of discretion, right? We have a lot of access to a lot of information. We see a lot of things that we can't disclose that we see. I tell folks all the time that, you know, on the protection side of the house, we protect the president, and if we had our way, the president would never leave the White House. That's the safest option, but we know that's also not a feasible option. The White House staff determines the schedule, and we just make sure it's the safest environment possible when the president travels. On the same token, we do a lot behind the scenes, right? Like culturally, we're not the agency seeking press releases and attention. We do our job quietly behind the scenes. You're supposed to be not seen or heard. So on the same note, on the investigative side of the house, we have long-lasting, strong relationships with financial institutions, payment card industry companies, and we do a ton of work that never sees the light of day, and that's okay. As long as we're disallowing illicit funds from getting into the hands of bad people, that's a win. It's a win for us, it's a win for that financial institution or other partner, and it's a loss for the bad guy. So when it comes to resources, our field offices, we have 45 field offices, and co-located within those field offices are cyber fraud task forces. Those are the local hubs for our investigative mission. I work in DC. I like to feel like I'm important, but I always tell people Batman exists in the field. We can be Robin, we can be Dr. Fox, and we can be Alfred the Butler, but we're here to support the field. So your local Secret Service Cyber Fraud Task Force is the one-stop shop for outreach, education, along with our counterparts. Generally speaking, they're going to be partnered up with every other law enforcement entity in that area, and all of the name or more forward-facing private sector entities in that area. So in their local areas, the cyber fraud task forces are the hubs, and then at the headquarters level, we have the Global Investigative Operations Center, which is the overall hub for the spokes that then exist in the field in those cyber fraud task forces or CFTFs. So back to the original point of discretion, just know that you can call the Secret Service, or if you have a better relationship with the FBI or HSI, call them too. There's no, we're all the good guys. I'd rather you have a rapport with the good guys than none of us. But just be confident that there's going to be discretion practice, and two, be confident that when you make connections with your local cyber fraud task force, that all of the assets, resources, tools available to the Secret Service are at their disposal through their task force internally and through the Global Investigative Operations Center, because we're not a very large law enforcement entity. I actually like that. I feel like it's less silos for things to get lost in, because we all know that more government doesn't always mean more effective government. But so again, that's our primary asset that I would present to you for a business to reach out to, and that's listed on our forward-facing website. If you just go to secretservice.gov and Google, you'll see it's one of the links. Local cyber fraud task force. You put in your city or your zip code, and it'll link you there, and then you'll be connected with some cool people.
Great, thank you, sir.
A lot of what Dave said applies to HSI as well. Specifically, we're focused on anything transnational. HSI, that's where we live and breathe. And it relates to that. You can think of any kind of global trade. You know, if you have anything where, and cyber is in that, that's our specialty. And that's, you know, illicit trade, travel, finance. We have a number of forward-facing programs. Financially, there's one that's called Cornerstone. That's for financial crimes, all sorts of financial crimes. Cornerstone. There's programs based off of counterproliferation for kind of the illegal exportation of commodities and weapons and all this, or importation. There's a number of things that we can assist with. We're happy to work with our partners on any kind of red flags for the different industries, infrastructure. We have all sorts of aids that can be of use, and we're pretty broad as well. You know, we're in every state, in domestically, 250 or so offices, 80 offices overseas. global partnerships, 24/7, 365, we're there. So if you have a good relationship, please exercise it, look them up. HSI, we're out there. But just like Dave said, I'm not going to be mad if you've called Secret Service. In fact, call Secret Service before you call the FBI. But I will say, just kidding. But call one of us. I mean, because this is seriously, all of this is too big of a problem for any one federal agency. And we're not the generalists anyway. Nobody in the federal government is a generalist. A special agent doesn't mean we're special. It means we're specialized. And, you know, Article 2 of the Constitution reserves police powers to the states. There's a reason. So we're not the general police. So we're specialized. So please call one of us if you have a question. And if it's not us, we'll redirect you. And I'm sure the others will as well. So
What about the fusion centers that are regionally dispersed that were very popular for a time? Do you guys support that still? Do you recommend involvement at a city level through a combined fusion center where you've got fire and local cops and federal and things?
yeah, we do participate in those, and a lot of the DHS runs those fusion centers. They have them all over the place, and we are plugged into those. They're mostly for intelligence, but it's not like spooky intelligence. It's the like, you know, law enforcement intelligence, EMS intelligence, if you imagine, and do recommend those. Those are good places to go if you have a question. It's a one-stop shop. In fact, I may be missing the mark on this, and you can correct me, Dave, but I think CISA actually does manage those. That's who manages that, because they have the infrastructure piece as well. And they are truly open brokers. So they're not going to be parochial about anything.
And just to add to that, I did want to mention, even I know Mr. Wales from CISA opened up with the keynote, but we're all DHS components. And CISA is, when you think about DHS, cybersecurity, education, and outreach, don't hesitate to make them your one-stop shop, because once something delves into the realm of needing a law enforcement eye on it, they're going to call us. We have folks co-located at a number of locations. So, and I know listen, like I know not everybody in the country is, you know, doing backflips to go, you know, work with law enforcement. That's okay. If that's the case, reach out to CISA, and if law enforcement needs to intervene at some point, we'll make sure that happens.
I think the message here for everyone is make the call, make it before the disaster, and make it to anyone, and then that anyone will help bring in the right resources from federal side.
Thank you, Tom. Great point to finish on. Tom, Dave, PJ, thank you very, very much for spending the first hour with us going over this very important topic. My sincere apologies to everybody from the perspective of we didn't get a chance to open it up to questions. We are trying to keep track, and our next panel starts in about 50 seconds. So my sincere apologies, but I can assure you that Tom, Dave, and PJ are planning to stick around just for a little bit. Should you have any questions, please approach them, and give, please, a round of applause to these executive leaders, thought leaders. Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.